Reports of the mistreatment and abuse of African and Asian workers in Saudi Arabia have been a significant human rights concern for many years. These issues are often linked to the kafala system, poor working conditions, and the lack of legal protections for migrant workers. Under the kafala system, workers are tied to their employers, which means they cannot easily leave abusive situations without risking arrest, deportation, or further abuse. Here have been numerous reports of physical abuse, including beatings, sexual assault, and torture, particularly among domestic workers. Psychological abuse, such as threats, isolation, and verbal harassment, is also common. Saudi Arabia's political and legal systems are deeply intertwined with its religious, cultural, and historical contexts. The country is an absolute monarchy, with the ruling Al Saud family holding significant power. Here's an overview of Saudi Arabia's politics and laws. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy, meaning the king has almost complete control over the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. The current king, as of my last update, is King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. His son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, often referred to as MBS, is widely seen as the de facto ruler and the driving force behind many of the country's recent reforms. The Al Saud family is the ruling dynasty, and members of the family hold key positions in the government. The line of succession is determined by the royal family, often prioritizing sons and close relatives of the ruling king. The king appoints the Council of Ministers, which includes the heads of various ministries. The council functions as the main executive body of the government. Saudi Arabia's legal system is based on Sharia, Islamic law, derived primarily from the Quran and the Hadith, sayings, and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. Sharia influences both civil and criminal law, with judges, qadis, interpreting the law based on Islamic principles. The Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, often referred to as the religious police, enforces public morality according to Islamic law, though their power has been curtailed in recent years. Under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia has seen some legal reforms aimed at modernizing the country and improving its international image. These include changes to guardianship laws, allowing women more freedom, and efforts to diversify the economy away from oil dependency under the Vision 2030 initiative. Saudi Arabia has very limited political freedoms. There are no political parties, and public dissent against the government is not tolerated. The government tightly controls media and public expression. Historically, women in Saudi Arabia have faced significant restrictions, including the guardianship system, which required male approval for many aspects of life. However, there have been significant reforms, such as allowing women to drive, since 2018, and increasing their participation in the workforce. Saudi Arabia is officially an Islamic state, and while it allows some private practice of other religions, public practice of any religion other than Islam is forbidden. Non-Muslims cannot openly worship, and conversion from Islam to another religion is considered apostasy, punishable by death. This is the flagship initiative of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, aimed at diversifying the economy, reducing dependency on oil, and modernizing Saudi society. It includes social reforms, economic initiatives, and efforts to attract foreign investment. Alongside economic reforms, there have been significant social changes, such as the relaxation of strict dress codes, the reintroduction of cinemas, and the promotion of entertainment and tourism. Saudi Arabia is a dominant force in the Middle East, with a foreign policy that often focuses on countering the influence of Iran, its regional rival. The country is also a key player in the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. Saudi Arabia has long-standing strategic and economic ties with Western countries, particularly the United States. These relationships are often complicated by issues like human rights concerns, but they are maintained due to mutual interests in energy, security, and regional stability. Saudi Arabia's politics and laws are characterized by a blend of absolute monarchical power, religious law, and recent reform efforts. While the country is undergoing significant changes, particularly under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, it remains a highly controlled society with limited political freedoms and a legal system rooted in conservative interpretations of Islamic law. The dark side of Saudi Arabia and its hidden facts. The issue of Saudi Arabia's treatment of political opposition, including accusations of extrajudicial killings, is a deeply concerning and complex matter. It is rooted in the country's political structure, governance, and approach to dissent. Here are some key points. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy where the ruling family holds significant power over the state's affairs. In such a system, political dissent and opposition are often viewed as threats to the stability and authority of the monarchy. The Saudi government has a history of cracking down on political opposition, activists, journalists, and anyone perceived as a threat to the regime. This has included arrests, imprisonment, and in some cases, allegations of extrajudicial killings. The government justifies these actions as necessary to maintain national security and stability. The most notorious case in recent years is the 2018 murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi dissident, inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Khashoggi was a vocal critic of the Saudi government, and his killing was widely condemned by the international community as an example of extreme measures taken against opposition. Saudi Arabia has limited space for political freedom and expression. Political parties are banned, and there are severe restrictions on freedom of speech, assembly, and press. Those who challenge the government's policies or criticize the ruling family often face harsh consequences. The Saudi government exerts significant control over the media and public discourse, making it difficult for opposition voices to be heard within the country. Those who attempt to speak out are often silenced, whether through legal means or more severe actions. The international community has frequently criticized Saudi Arabia for its human rights record, including its treatment of political opposition. However, geopolitical considerations, such as economic ties and strategic alliances, have sometimes tempered the global response. The treatment of opposition figures in Saudi Arabia is a reflection of the country's authoritarian governance model, where maintaining power and stability often comes at the cost of political freedoms and human rights. While there have been international calls for reform and accountability, the situation remains a significant concern for human rights organizations and advocates worldwide. Reports of the mistreatment and abuse of African and Asian workers in Saudi Arabia have been a significant human rights concern for many years. These issues are often linked to the kafala system, poor working conditions, and the lack of legal protections for migrant workers. The kafala system is a sponsorship system that gives employers significant control over migrant workers' lives, including their ability to change jobs, leave the country, or renew their residency permits. This system has been criticized for enabling exploitation and abuse, as workers are often at the mercy of their employers. Under the kafala system, workers are tied to their employers, which means they cannot easily leave abusive situations without risking arrest, deportation, or further abuse. Here have been numerous reports of physical abuse, including beatings, sexual assault, and torture, particularly among domestic workers. Psychological abuse, such as threats, isolation, and verbal harassment, is also common. Some workers have reported being forced to work long hours without pay or under conditions that amount to forced labor. Employers may withhold wages as a form of control or punishment. It is a common practice for employers to confiscate the passports of migrant workers, making it difficult for them to leave or escape abusive situations. This practice further entrenches their vulnerability. Migrant workers often face significant barriers to accessing justice. These include language barriers, lack of legal representation, fear of retaliation, and the complex and slow legal processes in Saudi Arabia. Many workers are unaware of their rights or are too afraid to report abuses. There have been reports of African and Asian migrant workers being held in repatriation centers under poor conditions while awaiting deportation. These centers have been described as overcrowded, unsanitary, and lacking basic necessities, with some reports of further mistreatment within these facilities. International human rights organizations, such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have documented numerous cases of abuse and have called on the Saudi government to reform the kafala system and improve protections for migrant workers. Some media outlets have published investigations and reports highlighting the plight of migrant workers in Saudi Arabia, bringing global attention to the issue and pressuring the Saudi government to address these abuses. In response to international criticism, Saudi Arabia has introduced reforms to the kafala system, including allowing workers to change jobs without their employer's permission and removing the requirement for exit visas. However, these reforms have been criticized as insufficient and not fully implemented in practice. As part of its Vision 2030 initiative, Saudi Arabia has expressed a commitment to improving the rights and conditions of migrant workers. However, significant challenges remain, and the effectiveness of these efforts is still being evaluated. Deep-seated cultural and structural issues contribute to the ongoing abuse of migrant workers. These include societal attitudes that devalue migrant labor, as well as a lack of enforcement of existing labor laws and regulations. Employers who abuse or exploit migrant workers are rarely held accountable, and the legal system often favors employers over workers. This lack of accountability perpetuates a cycle of abuse. While there have been some efforts to address the abuses faced by African and Asian workers in Saudi Arabia, significant challenges remain. The kafala system, although reformed, continues to create conditions that enable exploitation and abuse. To improve the situation, stronger legal protections, better enforcement of labor laws, and greater accountability for abusive employers are essential. International pressure and advocacy are also important in pushing for further reforms and ensuring that the rights of migrant workers are respected and upheld.